Hello, Improvised Star Trek listeners, and welcome. I'm Eric Scull, an editor of IST, and here with me are Chris Rathjen and Nick Wagner, executive producers, original cast members, editors extraordinaire. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello.
We're here, of course, to celebrate an occasion that is upon us. As it turns out, upcoming April 9th is the 5th anniversary of the podcast.
The debut of the podcast. Yeah.
Improvised Star Trek.
Yes.
And that first episode about a Gorn turns 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
How does it feel like yesterday?
It feels like yesterday, yeah.
I did not... Yeah, it's sort of a blur. We've just been, cranking them out.
Pumping them out, yeah.
You guys haven't left the house.
Yeah.
That's great. So now, Improvised Star Trek was a stage show first, and after its, can we call it a residency at I.O.?
It was a midnight slot and those are usually there's a decent amount of turnover in that. It was supposed to be 8 weeks. We ended up doing 8 months. So we felt pretty good about that.
Yeah.
But then it wrapped up as improv shows tend to.
Yeah. And all good things.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the thing that was kind of different about it is that anytime any of the two cast members ended up interacting with one another, I shouldn't say anytime, many times, we ended up talking about that show and how much we had enjoyed that show. And it got us thinking about whether or not there was still some life in it.
Yeah. And I think the idea was that, there's such a potentially much bigger audience for this show than people who would come out to a midnight show at the I.O. Theater in Chicago, mostly during the winter, which was when that run was happening. It's like, well, we're kind of limiting our audience there, and there's potentially just a huge number of people out there who'd be interested in what we were doing. And how could we go about reaching those people? And, doing an improv show for tens of thousands of people is not very feasible, but adapting it to a different and new medium, and podcasts were kind of taking off at the time, seemed like an easy, well, not easy, but an interesting choice, at least.
Huh. So talk about that work, if you can, a little bit more about what did that entail, changing a stage show and getting everybody back on board, bringing the band back together again, I imagine, like a movie show.
Well, basically, we got it to where Chris and I pitched it to the rest of the group as, hey, you guys, all you have to do is show up on a Sunday around brunch time, eat donuts and drink coffee, and then do this show just like we did, except on the couch. Except not moving around, not on the stage. We're just on the couch and we're imagining. And in improv, we have a form called the BAT that's basically a long-form improv without doing anything on stage. It's audio only.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't get performed much because turning the lights out on an audience will usually cause them to fall asleep.
Yeah.
But it is a well-known and established form.
Yeah, so we've all done it, so we know how it works and that it works. Basically the pitch to the rest of the group was, you guys don't have to do anything, and we'll record it, we'll take it, and we'll make it what the idea that we envision for it, and then present it back to you, and kind of that will be the pitch at that point. We'll show you what we mean by this. And I think a lot of the other cast members went along, because we haven't led them astray or anything, But I don't think a lot of them actually knew what it was going to look like or sound like.
Yeah, I mean, they were all enthusiastic about the show, and they were happy to give it a try. And then once we showed them what it was, everyone was pretty much on board.
Yeah, so. Yeah. A lot after recording about a Gorn and some of those earlier episodes, we had actually edited the episode called Phaser, I Barely Know Her, which I think was the 6th episode in the timeline. But we had edited that one early as a proof of concept, and that one in about a Gorn, and people were like, "Oh, like I can imagine the whole ship, like I'm there on the ship, like you guys really made it sound like it's a real thing, and you put us right there in the action and everything." And we're like, "Yeah, that's the idea," and then from there it just kind of took off from there.
We did need to kind of change the format a tiny bit. When we did the live show, it was 40-minute shows. And when we did that, there are some recordings of some very low energy attempts of us to do that. And it's Sunday, you're sitting on couches, with donuts and coffee.
Yeah.
And our first few attempts to do a 40-minute show were sort of, they drug. They drug a bit.
Slow, meandering.
Then I forget, I think it was Phaser I Barely Know Her, but I think we were just like, well, let's try a quick one. Let's try
20 minutes, we said.
And we came in with a lot more energy we had. And we're like, oh, well, this is clearly what you need to be to be engaged, to be engaging in an audio is to have that energy. And so that was the biggest probably change in format there.
I find that really fascinating because episodes of Star Trek are 45 minutes in that later series, 60 minutes originally, or roughly about an hour. But IST as sort of an episode in that universe gets away with being shorter, and it doesn't feel like anything's missing. Their entire arcs, entire episodes. Yeah. What sort of fat was trimmed there in terms of story structure for any individual?
I think we just made it faster. I think we just took the air out of them. In a lot
I mean, we had a lot of scenes. Doing a story improv, so it's hard to do. It kind of goes against the building blocks of improv are individual scenes and individual interactions between characters. And a television episode has structure, it has plot. So you can have a scene that doesn't necessarily mean anything on first viewing, and then it can be revealed to be important later. You can't really do that when you're writing as you go. You need to have a good scene. You need to know what the stakes are in that scene at that time. You don't have that distance that you have when you're writing something. Yeah. So to do good scenes, every scene needed to be important in and of itself. Yeah. And that just required a higher level of engagement.
And also, it's, we're doing Star Trek, but we're also doing comedy. And comedy is all about pacing and timing. Mm-hmm. And if you let the energy flag, especially when your audience no longer has something to look at to kind of distract them, they're just audio. If you let the energy kind of slide at all, I feel like you start to lose people. And that there's so much that people can listen to and be engaged with now that you don't want to lose them even for a second, and so you just tighten everything up and get it down as tight as possible, rather than having these kind of longer, meandering, lower energy shows.
Yeah, and I think I've said this before. Some of my favorite Next Gen episodes are actually kind of mysteries, and you can't really do that in improv. For the reasons I was saying before, like you need to know what's at stake when you're reacting to it. Yeah. So that's another tweak that had to be made. So.
And how can you? I guess this is just my curiosity, but like as a performer, how can you consciously go into something saying that, like with runtime in mind? Is it just practice that you kind of see and foresee what is going to be a 40-minute performance versus 27?
Yeah, you start to just get a feel for the overall pace.
Yeah, I mean, and that is something that you're trained to do. Yeah. Like when you're in classes, you're taught to be able to identify when a 4-minute scene when you're in the middle of it. Like,
yeah, and surely it'd be distracting if you're checking your watch. So you need to be able to.
You internalize it, and a lot of the shows that we have done as improv students and as improvisers here in the city tend to be more around the 20 to 30 minute mark. Mm-hmm. So we've really internalized that kind of pacing for a show. So when we did change to 20 minutes, it actually kind of kicked into our built-in improv timing brains, where we suddenly like, okay, now we're about the halfway point. Now we're 3/4 of the way. We need to start wrapping this stuff up, and now we're done.
Mm-hmm. So that all said, what makes IST work? Like what to you has been sort of, and you mentioned the proof of concept episode, but what constitutes a successful episode of the Improvised Star Trek?
I mean, the first thing is it just has to be funny.
Yeah, yeah. Like, number one rule.
I think we all have kind of different ideas on how Star Trekky it should be. And I know I prefer when we actually have a mission. I know other people in the cast, their favorite thing is us getting distracted and never having a mission.
Right.
Both of those are fine as long as the scenes are making people laugh.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, to use About a Gorn as an example, there's a Star Trek plotty thing happening. The Gorn ambassador is there, and Captain Baxter is supposed to be entertaining him.
Right, the crew is distracted by this mystery of is the Gorn a guy or a girl?
Yes.
How can you tell?
Right. And so that's just an entire... So there's a plot and a B plot there, kind of. The A plot is, what's going... The Gorn ambassador. And then the B plot is the shenanigans around that, the gender identity and just being curious. And similarly with Phaser, I Barely Know Her, there's... The crew just becomes obsessed with the captain and his first date with Lady Cola,
Is it a date?
And is it a date? Yeah. So it becomes very... We go off the Star Trek rails very quickly in those episodes, but we keep there's still the A plot involves some kind of Star Trek-y, science fiction-y thing happening, but really the comedy comes from just the goofiness of the characters, and not even goofiness, but just actual humanity of the characters. Because if you work with people and you suspect that two of them are dating, that's what people do. They gossip about
curious.
it. Yeah,
it's going to elicit a response in an audience, which is familiar with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've heard Sean Kelly talk about Improvised Star Trek as an office comedy in space.
Yeah,
and I think that's true.
Yeah,
that really works for that.
Yeah.
And then also in About a Gorn, though, Fritz and Jaffe on the bridge kind of taking over. They sort of prank call.
They start prank calling Starfleet.
Academy,
that's right. Yes.
Which is great. And sort of, I guess, a recurring theme in Improvised Star Trek is sort of the power struggle that occurs whenever the captain is not completely actively paying attention to the bridge.
Especially in those early episodes. Fritz is very much a agent of chaos and always, trying to drive the ship into a black hole. He's backed off of that a little bit. I feel like
he got married.
He got married. Yeah, he's more he's chilled out a little bit. Not so obsessed with driving into a black hole. But it's testing the boundaries of the chain of command within the world of the show, but also kind of testing the boundaries of Star Trek by just messing around with, of course, the Star Trek that we see on TV. No one's trying to take over the ship constantly, and there's not power struggles like that within the crew, but we get to have some fun with that sort of thing.
It's foreseeable, too, that an authority figure might just occasionally shrug off some of the nonsense that occurs naturally. There's the character played by you, I believe, one of the Starfleet heads.
Yeah.
At the end of About a Gorn says, "I'm just going to ignore this order for 2 pepperoni pizzas." That was like the Sisyphus, like Jaffe and Fritz. And Fritz says, "When is it coming?" And it's just like, okay, back up. But it's super funny.
Yeah, because everyone else, our kind of concept for how this exists, we want it to be plausible, at least, that the Sisyphus actually is a ship in Starfleet. And that when you watch the next episode of Next Generation, and they're talking about all of Starfleet has been called to this place, that the Sisyphus is in there somewhere. But how? Well, I mean, obviously we're quite incompetent and we do some things that are pretty shady and stuff, but we are, at least the kind of justification that I think Chris and I have, is that there's something magical about the Sisyphus. We managed to make things happen that no other ship can make happen, and so they keep us out there because they don't quite understand why we're succeeding in the ways that we are succeeding, which is not in the same ways that everyone else is succeeding, not in the same ways that Jean-Luc Picard is succeeding at all.
And now finally about a Gorn. Griffin plays the alien Gorn.
Yeah.
Is that sort of common for him to play the alien when there's sort of discounting special guests who often come in as alien roles? Does he sort of play the majority of?
Yeah, I would say he's probably the quickest one to jump into a zany role. Probably Matt is
followed by Matt.
But yeah, I think we've also I think Griffin. Well, I know Griffin loves Bugs Bunny, and that inspires a lot of like when he invents a character, they're often ridiculous off the top. Because you go big. Because there's no reason to have a boring alien.
Yeah, when I play aliens, they tend to be very boring. They talk like slow and low and blah blah blah, and it's like, well, that's not very fun. But you throw a grenade into the plot, and then suddenly everyone has to react to everything, and Griffin's great about doing that, and then everyone gets to jump in on the fun.
So the original cast of the podcast, Irene, Chris, Nick, Sean, Matt, Griffin, and Joe.
And Joe Whitman. Yeah.
And Joe Whitman.
Joe Phillips.
Phillips, yeah.
Jaffe Whitman.
Yeah. How sort of that they have a chemistry, those characters.
Yeah.
That all throughout the first season, the first 32 roughly episodes of IST, it's almost, I don't know how you guys do this, but it's almost like an arc that really works towards Jaffe's eventual departure.
I think that was just not really planned so much as we'd played together for 8 months a year before, so we sort of knew each other's style. And I will say, once we got to the podcast, I think the characters kind of firmed up a bit. Like when it was a midnight show, everyone had their idea about what their personality was, but if you needed to act out of character one week because that's what the plot required or the joke, it was fine.
Yeah, right.
Because the climax of the episode would probably be someone like popping out with a funny hat, being like the god of a planet or something.
Yeah.
I think once we started doing the podcast, the interactions between characters kind of gelled a bit more, and we kind of figured out like, what is Corbomite's relationship to Crick? What is Lorem's relationship to Lady Cola?
Yeah. Plus when we're doing a midnight show at a live show at a theater, you don't necessarily assume that everyone has seen every previous show.
Mm-hmm.
Some people did come to every show, and that's great, but you don't have to assume that, and kind of the audience understands this is kind of a one-off thing. But when you adapt it to the podcast, then every episode is still there, and we're hoping that people go back and listen to every episode subsequently, so you do start to actually build a thing. And it was always very organic. We didn't really talk about like, I want to see it go here and that sort of thing. It just happened. And sometimes we'd have to remind ourselves, oh yeah, that did happen. I should play with that again. Some new development that had happened, or some development that happened and then we'd drop it, and just never come back to it.
Yeah, I remember there was a scene, I can't remember which episode it is now, but very early on where I'm, as Corbomite, kind of trying to exert some control when the captain's away. And Joe, as Counselor Whitman, just runs circles around me by like appealing to what he knows Corbomite is supposed to care about.
Yeah.
And that was like a light bulb for me. It's like, oh yeah, I can be run over.
Right.
I
think that is about Gorn, isn't it? Because Lady Cola asks to go to the bathroom.
Oh, that is.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right there.
You're right.
Jaffe's like, you can't tell her not to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And Corbomite's like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Now that dynamic, I don't know. That may have happened in the live show, but that moment there is like, because there's always a question for me is like, as a character who wants the ship to be good, and as an actor who knows you shouldn't actually. Corbomite says everyone stop doing this. I'm thinking everyone keep doing it.
Yeah.
So figuring out like how to thread the needle on that was tough, and that was a moment where like, as long as this is the model that I get kind of bowled over by people who get me and know how to push my buttons, it's fine. It works. So
I think Corbomite's biggest flaw is that he's so self-reflective. Like, you can reason with him to get out of doing your job.
Yeah. You can convince him of anything. You just have to try, you know?
Yeah. And the characters are they're so three-dimensional, like, each of them, and like having different pairings of characters. I'm thinking of Arl's in Charge, when Baxter's put into an extended sleep period for a couple weeks and wakes up to find that Lorem has who may or may not be possessed by a ghost. I don't think it was ever 100% ruled out that it wasn't just Lorem pulling everybody's chain. But
that was totally a ghost.
Lorem and Lady take over. And Lady,
they enable each other.
You see a side of Lady. Like, that friendship is one of my favorite friendships. And it's never, you can rely on it being a thing, but you can't necessarily predict where it's going to go. And especially when then you get Lady and Baxter. You know, he's got a reason with her in that episode to get her to kind of come see the light, and, you know, all the characters, their knowledge of each other is at stake and constantly in play. In terms of how they interact. Which I find to be like, it's really dynamic, and it's also like it simulates. You can't really tell the difference that isn't being written. And
that's what it comes from, is just playing those relationships, and then it really does seem like you've thought of it all beforehand, only just because you've thought about, okay, I know who you are and I know who I am, and so if you do this, then I do this. And every time we add new cast members, and over the last year, since the podcast started, we've added 4. We had Mary Kate, we added Julia Weiss, we added Eli Mandel, and most recently Eleanor Hollingsworth. And every time someone new joins, we find all these new combinations, because they combine with every single other cast member and stuff. So just last weekend, we were talking about the way Eleanor's character, Raybeck, kind of fits in with the whole the crew and how they all play off each other. We kind of talk about it, and then we play it, and then that was interesting. We see how that goes, and you find things along the way that you never really would have expected necessarily.
I wanted to ask about the counselors. So the ship has had a few. For the first season, it's Jaffe Whitman. Eventually, Rita does join as the communications officer. Who really likes to communicate. So sort of a counselor role. And I guess she did go off and have a counselor role on the what's the other ship?
On Jaffe's ship, the Garcia.
The Garcia.
Well, she was actually the acting
captain. The captain. Yeah, that's right. I'm just thinking, wait a minute, but she had that room dedicated with the rug and the But so she's sort of a counselor, and then of course now Eleanor joined as counselor, Lieutenant Rayback. What did each of those characters, would you say, really bring to the role of a counselor and also to the ship?
I mean, I think, Joe was just insane. Like,
you just start talking, and you had no idea what was going to come out. You know what?
And it was always delightful. But also, as the person who it's eventually revealed isn't even a member of Starfleet, has just kind of talked his way into this job. He is probably his character had kind of the freedom to not know about Starfleet stuff and to come at stuff from a completely different direction than those of us who were trying to play Starfleet characters could. I mean, Julia just does some of the best emotional character work. So
she's basically insisting that other people have emotions and have reactions to things, and drawing that out of other people, which is really very generous improv. She'll say, I think you're feeling this, and blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, oh, I am feeling that, and then you start to actually play that. And then it's very funny. But then the thing I love about Rita King is that everything she says is actually about her. She's very narcissistic. She's a counselor. And in theory, she's helping people express themselves and explore themselves. But in reality, it's always all just about her, which is just great for a counselor. I love that. Love that character choice. And similarly, Eleanor as the counselor, Ravek as the counselor, is a Vulcan who, you know, in theory doesn't know anything about emotions and how to communicate about them. But in the classic Star Trek tradition is kind of learning those things and exploring them on her own and for her own self. And we're just starting to see what that looks like, which is really interesting.
Now, Mary Kate joined around episode 50, would you say?
Sounds right.
Yeah.
So for the first chunk, there was not a doctor on board the Sisyphus, at least as a regular
That's true. Yeah.
cast member.
Yeah, we did not include her when we mentioned add-ons, but she was not. She's been with us so long.
No, I mentioned her.
Oh, okay.
I mentioned Mary Kate.
Well, then edit out my statement.
Yeah.
We had had a doctor in the original live show, played by Charlie McCracken. He was Foggy McCloud, who was this weird gas cloud who had decided to take human form.
Huh.
And it was a delight, but he had to, like, even before the end of our run, he had to, like, kind of bow out because he had small children, and us doing a late night show on Saturday was kind of preventing him from interacting with them on Sunday. So then when we started recording on Sunday, he's like, no, I can't.
Yeah.
So for a while we made excuses about EMHs. But then when Mary Kate joined the cast, obviously, like, you know, there's not a Star Trek series that doesn't have focus, that doesn't have, the Doctor isn't a main character. So it just made sense for her to step in there.
Plus, she has some medical knowledge. Like, she has a background in the health industry, so she actually has jargon, and, you know, can kind of pass for a doctor.
So was that her choice, or did you say, "Hey, we kind of, you know,
it was her
it's
choice.
Still your choice, but we could use a doctor"?
There was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I do think she was all about the Doctor.
Yeah.
All about playing the Doctor. And it's great for her character choice as someone who's supremely unconfident about herself. I mean, of course, that's going to be the Doctor. the person
you
needs,
rely on most in a space situation when you're isolated from civilization. So now, going into sort of more broad strokes here, what would have been the most memorable over the last 5 years? Memorable plot lines, memorable episodes, aliens in particular, interactions, character moments for you guys specifically that you've been most proud of, seeing realized.
Well, one of my favorite alien moments is recently was Who Washes the Window Washers? Where there's a race of tiny beings that turns out Crick and Captain Baxter keep around in order to wash the windows on the Sisyphus. And I love that by the end, they've convinced Captain Baxter that he's a slave and that Starfleet is keeping him enslaved, and he's going to free us all by the end.
I think one of the episodes I was most excited by was Santa got run over by a shuttlecraft. And that was our Christmas one, and it's about Captain Baxter fighting Krampus in orbit around a planet. But my favorite part of it, it's all told, it's all a story that Fritz is telling the kindergarten class, and throughout the course of the episode, other people come in and tell the story. And the fact that we get to see that all the scenes are informed not only by who the characters in the scenes are, but what we know the narrator's perception of him is.
Yeah, and that requires a very high level of understanding of all the characters' relationships to each other. So if Fritz is telling the story, then what does Crick act like in Fritz's version of the story? Sean has to know that so that he can act like that. And I love, my favorite part of that episode is when Zarlene starts telling the story. Zarlene comes off terribly in her own story. You know, everyone else casts themselves as some kind of the hero, or everyone else at least comes off poorly in relationship to them. But in Zarlene's version of the story, she's the crappiest one, and everyone else is great. And
That's a great choice.
Yeah.
That's-
I'm trying to think other good aliens. Well, Mary Kate's first episode with us before she was Zarlene Zonelson. She was
Polyandroid?
no, that was
that was Irene.
That was Irene.
Oh, no.
No, Mary Kate was an antimatter cloud
no kidding.
that we made friends with.
Yeah.
That one was fun just because we don't actually deal with spacey stuff like that quite as much as I would like. So to meet a free-flowing entity in space was exciting, and I think we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
So what are Corbo and Lorem's proudest moments, do you think, as crewmen on the Sisyphus?
Ooh. Well, I think there is. I can't believe it's not Romulus. There is a episode where we're at the border of the neutral zone, and the A story is Captain Baxter and Julia actually as a guest as a Romulan commander, Trina Trinst, and they had history. Corbo's B story is he's convinced the Romulans are up to something, and is for the bulk of the episode, it looks like he's wrong. And then at the end, because it's improv, I reveal that he's right.
So that was your proudest moment too.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So, yeah, he's right all along. Here we go.
Yeah. I liked, well, Lorem is pretty unrepentant, but there's the episode where Crick has constructed a chastity belt for Lorem. It's called the Penetrant. And I like that episode because, well, there's a lot of crude humor in it, of course. But then in the end, Lorem has to embrace himself. He has to embrace his perversion, his desire, and it's that helps them actually overcome the problem of the episode. So it's about self-acceptance in a way.
Yeah. No, I can see that, and about how every crewman is valuable and contributes in a different way, yes, but altogether the same.
Exactly. Which is a Star Trek trope. It's a classic Star Trek there.
Yeah, you never know when Wesley or Keiko is going to prove to be the
Keiko in the clutch.
So we talked about sort of favorite episodes. Sean Kelly has he's blogged a couple times. He has a couple lists of favorite IST episodes throughout. What are some of the ones that maybe aren't as common or haven't been on his list that you guys are most think should be listened to, or you yourselves go back to listening to if you do listen?
There is one. It's in the 30s. Engineering Imagineering, which is Fritz has basically converted all of engineering to Disneyland. And as such, we're caught unawares by Cardassians and need to work our way out of it. That's a very fun one.
One of my all-time favorites is Today is a Good Day to Cry, where we encounter a Klingon ship that is captained by a teenage Klingon girl on her first captaincy. And it starts with us being soundly defeated by this Klingon girl in battle. But in battle is not, as it turns out, what she needs, what that character needs to develop. She's a fine warrior. She needs to be allowed to be herself. And that's what, of course, Rita King helps her attain. And that episode ends with a beautiful Klingon prom dance victory over the
burning cities of your enemies.
Cities of my enemies dance. With Corbomite graciously being the date to the dance. And I love that one because we get to deal with Star Trek stuff, Klingons, classic Star Trek stuff, but we do it in our own way, which is to have a prom by the end.
One of my favorites that I go back to all the time is Starfleet Foxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially I guess a wet t-shirt calendar contest among the crew, except Loram, who you think would be the first one to jump at sort of this sexual come out and show what you've got, is the only one doing any work.
Yes.
And in fact has made first contact or in general has uncovered a mystery.
Something with eggs.
This he does harvest Lady Cola's ova at some point.
Yes.
But it's for science and he saves an entire species.
Yes. And that's all in the background.
No one works harder than Loram.
Yeah.
And it's just, you expect him to jump out. And of course there's a big reveal at the end, which I won't spoil, but it's so funny. And that guest actress who plays Fritz's sister.
Kristen Studdard.
The French accents, I don't know, something about it is just so unique. And
our German engineer's French sister.
Yes.
Half sister, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll never forget Corvo, his experience in the holodeck with the dead soldiers around him, and he's the survivor, but he can't quite come to terms with it.
Yeah.
Why me? There's so much nuance and so many great things to admire. You can really fall in love with each of the characters in a different way and for different reasons and at different times, which I think is a great accomplishment.
And those episodes about a Gorn, Phaser, I Barely Know Her, Starfleet Foxes, I think those were all produced. The first 20 or so episodes were produced when Chris and I were the only editors, and we were producing them every week. So as soon as I finished an episode and put it up, I basically would have to start on the next one because Chris would put up the episode for the next week, and then and that was a pace that we learned was not sustainable.
Sure.
For two people. So we moved.
And also it was sort of an enemy of the quality that we wanted to bring to
we always felt rushed
episodes.
And so we thought, well, we'll produce half as many episodes and they'll be twice as good. And I think that's what we did.
Okay, well, and then of course at some point the live runs came back. You were doing this. You were doing the stage show again.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of a unique interaction where they sort of feed off of each other. Characters may be created on the podcast, can make appearances at the live show, or vice versa. I remember listening to, I think it's Phaser, I Barely Know Her. There's the coat rack joke, which is clearly like it's a leftover visual gag from when the live run, but I like the way that the two interact and blend together, and kind of, if you have the opportunity to see a live show, you just get that extra sense.
I think of the live shows as almost like little spurs off of the main timeline, like the Improvised Star Trek timeline goes like this, and then we have little branches that just kind of dead end, because the live shows are a continuity of their own. We can't we can't assume that people have seen them, you know, and fully use everything back into the main timeline.
And we need to leave the door open for people to do crazy things in live shows, like marry Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, sometimes we all die at the end of a live show, you know.
So what's the story with Abraham Lincoln? I have to ask now. How did that come to be?
So I hope I don't get this wrong. So during the initial run, I know. Well, during our very first show, the live run, our costumes were not ready. Our shirts were not ready. So everyone came in kind of different costumes, saying they were their civilian clothes. And I came like I was coming from the holodeck. And then during that live run, I did that almost every week. I very, very rarely wore my uniform. I was always coming to or from the holodeck.
Which is great for the guy who's the most professional character, you know, to not be in uniform.
So I know at a certain point I was Abraham Lincoln, and it was revealed what I was doing in the holodeck was actually reenacting Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure from Abraham Lincoln's point of view.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether that's the reason we have a hologram Lincoln, or whether that had been started independent
Well,
way.
I think you had the hat. We had the hat and the beard and stuff then, and then someone could just play Abraham Lincoln. And of course, the most obvious explanation is that he's a hologram in the future. So, and then it just became a running thing.
Yeah, so I don't know. It may have been. I would guess Griffin probably grabbed my hat backstage and came out. Yeah.
Well, we mentioned the timeline, and I want to mention there's actually a lot of work went into creating a timeline that is scrollable on the website. You can certainly find it at improvisedstartrek.com. But is there another link for it? Is it a website or?
There is. Go to Improvised Star Trek.
Yeah, Improvised Star Trek, so you can find that. I want to talk a little bit about the future because there is in the works a new website or retrofit for Improv Star Trek and kind of a way that listeners, viewers will be able to interact with the show in new ways.
Yeah, we're hoping. So we're going to have kind of the option. It's going to be sort of an IMDb of Improvised Star Trek, so you can see, every episode that Greg has been in. Every episode that. Greg's the only character I care about.
We're just going to have a place where you can go to see what episodes Greg is in.
Yeah.
Greg Tracker.
Greg Alert.
But yeah, so we'll have that option. People will be able to kind of search by that. You can figure out when your favorite character showed up. Because aside from the main cast, all of these secondary and tertiary characters we've picked up over the years are solely accidental. Like, we made a joke one time, and then we were enamored enough in it that we made it again. Yeah. Like, I need somebody to say "aye, aye, sir." Why not have it be the same random supernumerary that we had before? So that's going to be something we offer on the site. I actually don't. We have some other exciting ideas, but I don't know what the rollout schedule for them is, so I'm gonna be vague.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are we planning to release? I know, Gage, we talked about this a little bit. If not, cut it out. But are we planning to re-release About a Gorn in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, we can.
It's like sort of souped up HD.
Yeah, I mean we're hoping to just give it a little bit of polish. Back in the day, our methods have just come a long way since then. We've got better software and better capabilities, so we're hoping to just clean it up a little bit. And since that's going to be a lot of people's introduction, or at least one of the first episodes they listen to, we really want to be able to put our best foot forward. So we're hoping to give it that extra little polish.
Now, complete reflection here, retrospective, but the big question for you guys is, if the current cast of the Sisyphus were present during the events of About a Gorn, how would it have changed? What would have been different, do you think? And let's just speculate here.
Rita would have made us talk it out somehow. I don't think it would have ended so violently.
I don't know. Zarlene might have saved that Gorn.
Yeah. Having a doctor might have helped. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I actually do not think Rip would have been helpful at all.
No.
Probably would have stolen those Gorn eggs at the end.
All right.
So, and I don't know. Ravek would have done a mind meld.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time.
Oh, yeah.
And definitely, viewers, thank you for watching. If you're listening on the audio, thank you for listening.
Yes, and apologies for the sounds of cat torture in the background.
If you heard the cat, that's the sound of, or that's the good proof of how upgraded the equipment is.
That's right. Yeah.
Or how there are some things that we still can't cut out.
Yeah. It was either that or have her just crawling over us the whole time. So sorry for the cat torture. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's to another 5.
Yeah, let's do another 5.
Good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay!